In all of my years of 3D animation, there's one skill that has always haunted me: hair. And I'm not alone. So many artists do exactly what I used to and just throw a hat on a character. Or worse yet, just phone it in with some big, overly stylized chunks of geometry and convince themselves that it looks good. Now, there definitely are cases where it works, and that's the best fit for that stylization. But I think we both know that it's rarely a matter of choice for most of us. So today, I'm done being a coward. And if you're tired of making subpar geometry, chunked up hair, you're done being a coward too. Together, we're gonna go over exactly how to create stunning hair in Blender that will elevate your character without making you cry. We'll create hair systems with geometry nodes using 2 different methods, dive into the process of hair grooming, demystifying it, making it approachable, and if you can face your fear of hair with me for long enough, I will show you one Blender add-on that will take your hair game up to the next level. By the end of this video, you'll be able to groom just about any scenario you can think of. Now, there is one thing here to note: this is not the greatest, most dynamic Pixar level hair. I have a motion design background, and that comes with certain motion design sensibilities. I'm always looking for the best outcome in the fastest time with the least amount of migraines. This method is perfect for those stylized characters that are quickly becoming popular in advertising and motion design, and it can even be converted to hair cards for game engines. If you got a character handy, dust it off and get ready to make it look exponentially better. If not, you can always grab this free practice head from my Gumroad. You can find the link below. Let's go play barbershop. Blender has some really interesting particle sim tools that include the ability to create hair systems. Most of us are probably familiar with that. But it also has a system for hair generation that was added back in the olden days in Blender 3.2. This system relies heavily on curves and geometry nodes to create hair structures that are extremely customizable and surprisingly intuitive. To get you real comfy with the basics and help demonstrate the workflow, we're going to create a very simple and anti-establishment mohawk. Let's get to it. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is create a hair cap. That will allow us to have a lot more geometry to work with, and we don't have to be laden down by the weight of the subdivision. Let's go ahead and hit tab to go into our character's head. And if you're working with your own character, that's totally fine. But I'm working with this little guy. So I'm just going to go ahead and select my ears. And I'll hit Command L to select all those polygroups. I'll hit H to hide those. That way I can just select all the polygons I need. So from here, I'm just going to select around where I think I'll be drawing hair. So I think somewhere like that is probably good. I might want to have some sideburns, so I think like that is going to be perfect. Just a little bit bigger than what we'll actually need in reality. So that works for there. Now we can hit Shift D to duplicate that, and I'll hit P to separate that selection from that head. And now we have a separate object here. And I'm going to go over to my modifier stack here and hit Command A and apply that modifier so that we have a nice subdivision level here. So now I can hit Tab to go back into edit mode. I'll hit A to select all of these, and we can shrink the selection by just going to this little spiky cube, and we'll just shrink that down just a little bit underneath the head here. So I'll tab back into object mode. Now to add hair with the geometry node system, it's actually pretty simple. Let's go ahead and hit Shift A, and we will go down to curves and go up to empty hair. Now we can find that if we drop down to where our head is, under the head 001, let's go ahead and rename this to hair cap. Under hair cap, you can see we have curves here, and I'm just going to name this mohawk. So now we have a mohawk hair object here, but you can see there's nothing really happening on the mesh itself. So let's go up to object mode here and drop down to sculpt mode. Now in sculpt mode, you'll get some hair options. This will be a little bit different than if you entered into sculpt mode on a piece of geometry or on an object mesh. These sculpting tools are a little bit different. So we can see the brush is loaded, and we have a variety of different brushes here. But what we're going to focus on first is just this little plus symbol right here. If you start sculpting onto the top of it, you can see it's drawing what we call hair guides. So these hair guides are actually going to determine the flow and the length of what our hair is doing. So I'll hit Command Z to undo that. But there's a couple of ways to do this. You can just draw it out like this and have some chaos. You can make the radius a lot bigger so it draws less. You can click one at a time and set them exactly where you want them, or you have this stamp tool down here in your brush settings where you can just stamp a whole bunch of them at once. And of course you can change all the parameters up here. So I'm going to go ahead and just set some hair guides here. But before I do that, I want to change a few parameters. Up here in the parameters section at the very top, we have curve shape. If we drop that down, we get the length and points. And these are going to be important as we start to sculpt out. For the mohawk, it might not matter as much, but for more intense hair grooms, you might really want to pay attention to this. So the length, let's set that to 0.2, and the points, 8 was fine, but we can drop that down to 6 because we don't need a lot of control. If you have longer hair or more curly hair, you're going to want more points to be able to groom that easier and have a little bit more control over it. So we're going to keep that at 6. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my X symmetry. So wherever I set down a hair, it will mirror it across the X. So I'm just going to go through here and just kind of draw out a mohawk. And I think that looks pretty good for a mohawk. So now that we have these hair guides, let's go over some of these brushes. Let's start from the right, and this is just going to be the select brush. So this will allow you to select different pieces of the hair curves so that you can manipulate certain parts of these, and you can go up here and change it from points to the entire hair, and then you can just select that. And of course you can change the size and intensity of the brush so that it selects a smaller region, just like that. We already went over the little stamp brush here. This is the delete brush and the add brush, which will be up here in the top left. From here you have smooth, so if you have some jagged edges in your hair curves, you can just go over and smooth that. This is the move brush right here. It does exactly what you would think it would do. You can just grab a hair curve and move it along the surface. Right here is the pull tips. So this will actually elongate the hair and allow you to move it as you elongate it, like that. This is the puff. If you have something that's kind of down and you don't really like the way it looks, you can always use the puff brush and it will push the hairs up on their end. So kind of returning them to this original position that we have here. This is the pinch brush, which is really great if you want to get a more pinched look. And similarly, you can hold down Control and it will do the inverse and puff it out. Here is the grow and shrink brush. This does exactly what you would think it would do. It grows the hair out in its normal direction. And similarly with the pinch brush, you can hold down Control and it will shrink it. And that brings us finally to our comb brush. This will be the most used brush for grooming, and this just allows you to actually comb out the hair curves. It doesn't really work like the grab brush like you would feel like it would work. It works exactly like a comb. It just kind of teases out the sides. So as you're grooming these hair curves, think of it like an actual like brush or comb. But we're gonna pull this out like this and make this feel a little bit more chaotic. We don't really want a perfect mohawk, and then I can get some nice curvature going, and then I think about here it starts to go back the other way. I think that's a half decent groom on the mohawk. Now obviously this doesn't really look like a very good mohawk right out of the gate. Most mohawks aren't consistent of like 20 hairs total, so we need to add some more hair to make it look a little bit more official. There are essentially two basic ways to achieve hair density. The first one is going to be duplication, and the second is going to be interpolation. Duplicate hair curves does exactly what it sounds like it does. It just duplicates all the hair curves around the radius of the hair guide. If you don't have it open already, pick a window, and if you need to, you could click down at the bottom and drag it out. But let's change it from 3D viewport or whatever you have it to over to Asset Browser. And under Asset Browser, you should be able to find hair just like this right here. And when you click it, you'll get these really colorful, nice icons. So from this, we're just going to use the duplicate hair curves, and you can click and drag it right on to your hair guides there. And immediately that added some hair. And now let's go over to our modifier stack. Once you put the duplicate hair curves on, you can go over to the side panel, and we'll just go to the modifiers exactly like you would do if you were modeling some. So under the modifier stack, we can now see we have duplicate hair curves, and we have all these nice parameters to control it. But really what we're going to focus on is the amount and the radius. So the amount, let's set this to 200, get some nice density going. That's already starting to look much better than the 7 hair curves that we had. Let's also change the radius. So the radius, we can see if we have it really low, kind of looks like a bristle brush, kind of have a toothbrush head here. And if we push it up, we can see that it starts to fan out from the middle of each guide. We can also change the tip roundness to make sure we don't get any harsh edges there, and that starts to look a lot more natural. So I think this works pretty good for a mohawk. In fact, this is exactly the type of scenario where you would want to use duplicate hair curves for. So duplicate hair curves works really, really well for something exactly like this, for something where you want to have direct control over it, something like a mohawk or a mustache or something you might want to stylize a little bit more, something that you're going to need direct control over, and it's not going to be super heavy. Whereas interpolate hair curves, which is what we're about to use, is a lot better for a full head of hair or a beard or fur, something that would be a lot less expensive to use interpolate hair, but you get a little bit less control. So let's go ahead and turn off duplicate hair. You can just click that little screen. Now we're going to scroll down to interpolate hair curves. So let's go ahead and drag and drop that onto our hair here. And as you can see, nothing happens. The reason for that is we actually have to set the surface. So we could sample it, or we already have our hair cap named hair cap, so you can just select that. And you'll see that's really not where we want it to be. It's kind of all over the place here. There are like 4 hairs, and they're all random. So what we need to do is actually increase the density. So let's increase the density to something a lot crazier. Let's do it 15,000 and just see where that gets us. So that feels a little bit better, but as you can see, that is not at all looking like a mohawk. That's not how we want it to look. So we need to change a few parameters and add a couple things to make this work. It takes a little bit more setup to do the interpolate hair curves, but if you have something like a full head of hair, you don't really want to duplicate each individual guide. So to actually control where this is happening, because right now it's interpolating it all over the mesh, it's using the hair guides to tell it both the direction and the length. So to instruct it where it's allowed to populate hair and where it's not allowed to populate hair, we need to create a mask for that. So what we're going to need to do is exit out of sculpt mode. We can go back to object mode, and now we need to select our hair cap. With our hair cap selected, we can go down to the data properties panel, and under vertex group, we're just going to add a new vertex group, and let's name this mohawk. So remember what you name it, because that's going to be very important. You're going to have to reference it and spell it correctly, which is going to be a challenge for me. So with the vertex group now selected, we can go up to the mode and drop down to weight paint. If you are not a fan of weight painting, or weight painting scares you a little bit, don't be intimidated. Think of it as a heat map painting. So we're going to turn X symmetry on and draw exactly where we think our mohawk is going to go. That's a pretty good weight paint. I think that's looking pretty good. But what's really cool about painting the weight is that you can control the gradient. So you can tell Blender, this is 0, this is 1, but in between here, there's quite a bit of room for gradient. So that will come in handy later when we actually try to do a fade. But for now, we're just going to keep it like this in 1s and 0s with a little bit of overlap. So let's exit weight paint mode to go back to object mode. We can select our hair again, go back to our modifier stack, and under density mask, click this little flag here, and we're going to look up mohawk. Type that back in there, and sure enough, it pops up and populates exactly where we want it. So now we can go ahead and kind of reference the difference between the two of these. So this is interpolate hair, and this is duplicate hair. Now obviously the duplicate hair looks a lot better for this particular instance, but the interpolate hair definitely has time and place to be used. So now that we understand the basics of creating hair curves, let's spend some time styling this so it looks a little better. If we pop into render view, we can see that this looks absolutely heinous. So we need to do a few things to make sure that it's not going to look like this forever. So let's go back into solid mode and add a few more modifiers. All of these modifiers act just like a stack, and I can show you exactly what I mean. Let's start by using the clump hair curves. If I drag and drop that on there, you can see it just kind of clumps that up and puts it in a nice spike. But if I put this above duplicate hair, we can see that it is actually clumping the hair curves itself, not the duplicated hair. So now we get 3 good clumps, and he kind of looks like a dragon, versus having a nice spiky Liberty Spike type look. So clump hair curves is pretty cool. You have a lot of parameters to play with. You can play with the shape, and you can actually make it so it goes the opposite way. I don't know why you would ever want to do this, but if you had a character who was a toothbrush, I suppose this is perfect for that. But we're not going to have it look quite like that. We can play with the tip spread to get a more natural look. And of course, you can play with the factor. And something great about clump hair curve is you can actually change the offset. I can play with the offset a little bit. Once again, it just pushes that realism further so that all the hair is a little bit randomly sorted. So the next thing I want to add, and actually this is going to go at the very top of the stack, is the set hair curve profile. So I'm going to drag and drop that on there. And this will tell Blender exactly how thick these hairs should be. So in the viewport, it looks like normal hair, but if we go to our render properties and we go to curves, and we turn it to strips, we can see exactly how thick this is. And that does not look realistic. And if we go back into render view, it matches exactly what we were seeing on the viewport. So that can be helpful to visualize what your hair is going to look like, just changing that to strips. Let's just go back to our modifiers here, and we're going to change the radius in the set hair curve profile to something like 0.0008. I think that looks pretty good. That might still be pretty bristly, pretty coarse hair, but I think that's going to work for what we need. And I'm just going to bring that back to the top of the stack right under duplicate curves. The next modifier that we're going to add is the frizz hair curve. Let's go ahead and drop that in, and we can see that it adds some frizz, and we can get really frizzy. This is kind of what I look like in the humidity, but let's drop that down. Again, all we're trying to do is make sure that it achieves some amount of realism, and I think something like that looks good. Now we can reference that again. Let's go into render mode, kind of see what that looks like. All right, I think that looks about right. So now we need to create a hair material for this. So to create a good hair material, you could use the already preloaded hair BSDF inside Blender, but I prefer to do something a little bit different. Blender has a great default file that's available for download, and I'll link it below so you can download it yourself. And we're just gonna append a few node trees from that file. So if you want to, you can download that. We're just going to go up to File and down to Append, and then navigate to where we downloaded that. So I've got that downloaded and I've got it appended here. And now I'm just going to navigate to Node Tree, and I'm going to grab the basic hair shader, and I'm going to grab Set Material as well. So I can hit Append, and that will just bring everything in. So right now I have my geometry nodes group right here, which is kind of cool to see exactly what's happening. As you select each one of these different modifiers, you can see exactly the geometry node setup and what's going on underneath the hood. But I'm going to change this to shader editor, and I would encourage you to do the same. And now we're just going to add a new material, and I'm going to rename this hair. So we can get rid of the principled BSDF. Here, I'll drag this out a little bit so we can see it a little better. I'm going to enter into material preview so I can just see exactly what's going on. We can select the principled BSDF and get rid of this by hitting X. Now let's just look up group. Sure enough, a 000 basic hair shader will appear. That's what we just brought in. Let's go ahead and hook that up right here, and you'll see we can view it in our viewport here. And we're going to change this color a little bit. Now I want it to be a little bit punk rock, so I'm going to choose something like a nice purple, and color 2 is going to stay kind of a brown black. And now we can turn down random color, and we can turn up root color and turn up darken root. So if we go to render view, we can just kind of see what this looks like. And yeah, that's pretty punk rock. That looks like kind of a cyberpunk character. It's pretty cool. Alrighty, we've got the basics down. But it's not the basics that'll get you. It's the application to real world problems. So let's create some problems, a skill that I've developed thoroughly. Now, Elijah's original approach to hair, wing it. And let me tell you, it did not turn out well. Listening to people that are much smarter than me, I am here to tell you, use references and annotate them. I went ahead and coerced ChatGPT to spit out an image of a really handsome business casual man. So let's go ahead to take a minute and just kind of analyze the hair flow and the structures at play. All right, we have this very handsome fella here in Photoshop, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through exactly how I plan out hair. So again, we're going for more of a stylized look, so this doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. But let's start with the sides here. We can see we kind of have these nice chunks here, and this one is kind of tapered into that one, so we'll need to pay special attention there. But from here, we can kind of see it kind of just pushes out like that, and it's kind of its own hair that wraps around. In fact, you can see from this angle, can't believe ChatGPT is able to render the same guy from the front and back. That's super cool, blows my mind. But we can see that it kind of follows here and all just kind of points down this way. So the hair flow is going to kind of come around like this and then just kind of push down like that. Same this way, only you don't have as much flow from this way. It all just kind of empties out at the bottom of his neck here. As far as the top goes, I'll choose another color here. Same kind of thing. You have this big chunk of hair, so I think we'll split it probably into 2 pieces of hair. This hair has a nice, hairline here and a little bit of a widow's peak, so we can pay attention to that if we want to, or we can just ignore it and keep it pretty stylized. But this hair actually kind of starts right here, and the flow pushes up all the way along the seam here, along the part of his hair, and then it kind of waves back like this. See, it still kind of has a nice flow, but it kind of tapers down into the fact that it just kind of ends short here. So these hairs right here are going to be really short, and these hairs up here are going to need to be a lot longer because they're going to kind of quaff back all the way. And then in the back here, you can see, again, here's the chunk of hair. And as it's getting to the back, it's still very, very long for this side, and it's probably going to need to be shorter on this side. So then this is just going to kind of flow back like this a little bit, and it will kind of end just overlapping the top of it, kind of almost like a comb over. Now that we have a good reference, let's get on with it and create some handsome business casual hair. To create this handsome hair, I went ahead and turned off the mohawk. It's still in the project file, I just have it turned off. But from here, we need to add a new hair group. So let's hit Shift A with our hair cap selected. We can go to curves and grab an empty hair. And once again, we need to go into sculpt mode. So we're going to start by adding the side hairs. So there are a couple different ways to approach this, but we're going to start with making everything kind of an afro. It's really tempting to get in there and start shaving the hair down with the shrink and grow tool or grooming, but we just want to make sure we get the length of the hair right first, and then we'll reverse engineer it. So I'm just going to start by drawing out my hair curves. I'll turn X symmetry on. I'm just going to go one by one, just setting these out. It doesn't really matter because we can always go back and populate these a little bit better, but I'm just setting them out where I know I'm going to want hair. So let's go back to object mode, and we're going to start by adding in a interpolate hair curves guide, just like that. And if you remember, what we have to do is actually select the hair cap, increase the density to 5,000. That's pretty crazy still, but we can of course draw our map here. So let's select our hair cap, go back down to data properties panel, and we will just add a new vertex map. I call this hair underscore guides. And let's enter into weight paint mode. And let's just start painting out the sides of the hair. Okay, I think something like that is going to be really good. We can now select our hair, go back to the modifier, and change our density mask here. Let's click that little flag. We'll just type in hair underscore sides, and it will only populate right there. Now you might be thinking, Elijah, this looks like a clown. This does not look like a business casual haircut. Never fear, we're going to change a few more parameters. Let's start with the set hair curve profile because that's driving me insane. Drop this down to 0.005. And that looks a lot better. Now we can actually increase the density as well. So we're just going to increase this density to 25,000. And that's still not quite dense enough, but you know what? Let's just increase this to 50,000. Okay, that'll work for now. Maybe it's not perfect, but we'll get back to it eventually. That really didn't solve anything in the way of looking like a clown. This actually might look worse depending on your perspective is, but we're going to use a trim hair curves modifier to actually be able to taper it. So let's select our hair here, and we're just going to go down to the very bottom and select trim hair curves. We can just drag and drop that there. And well, one might actually argue that this made it worse, but we're not done yet. So let's go ahead and toggle the slack and take a look at our trim hair curves here. As we can see, if I play with this length factor value, it will change the length of the hair. So if we wanted to make our hair shorter, done. And that would look fine, except that looks really not good. Again, this is a business casual young man. This is somebody who's wanting to get ahead in his career, so we want to make sure his hair looks really good. So we need to change the profile of how long the hair is. So as you can see down here, we have a mask profile. If we turn that all the way down or up, it's a float, and once again, that creates a map that's just 1, 0, whereas we want to create a gradient map. So let's once again select our hair cap, go to data properties panel, add a new vertex group, and let's change this to hair underscore length. I'm going to wireframe mode and change to weight painting mode. And rather than painting this on, because that can get a little bit messy, what I'm going to do is actually hit tab to go into edit mode. And I'm just going to grab my lasso select, and I'm just going to select all these vertices right here. And I'm just going to go back over here to my data properties panel, and I'm going to click assign. So now if I tab back into a weight painting mode, we can see that there is a hard edge here. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you exactly what's being done here, and then we'll come back in and finesse it a little bit. So let's go back into object mode, select our hair here, go back to our modifiers panel, and toggle this little mask and type in hair. And there it will populate hair length. And as you can see, that did exactly what we're wanting to do. It just did it in a very bad way. It changed the factor of the length quite a bit. So that is not a very good fade. I think that's called an undercut, but I'm not entirely sure. Regardless of what it's called, it looks really bad. So let's adjust our vertex group a little bit more. So let's select our hair cap, go back to our vertex groups here, and we will go back into our weight painting mode. With our weight paint, we can see the reason this is cut off the way it is because there's a very hard, sharp line. So we can go up to weights and go down to smooth, and we can start to play with the gradient of the fall off here. That's looking pretty good. He does look a bit like the villain from the Lego movie, but that's okay. We're not done grooming him. So I'm going to go back into object mode and select our hair. And now we can start grooming. I'm going to go back into sculpt mode, and now we can just actually start pushing this hair around. That looks pretty good. We still have a little bit of some stragglers here, so I can go back into my hair cap and the hair sides, and I can just make sure that I get the weight painting squared away here. And I can just hold control and just make sure I'm painting out some of these stragglers. Because we used the trim parameter to change the length, we don't have to go back and manually cut down our hair. We can leave it at the length it is, and it works perfectly. So let's go ahead and style this a little bit more because again, this is kind of a stylized look. You can keep it natural if you want, keep it looking normal, but I'm going to stylize mine a little bit so that it looks just a little crazy. Okay, I think that looks really good for our purposes. Let's add a material. We can look up our hair material that we had that's pink, and we can just duplicate that if we want to keep our pink hair. But I don't think he should be rolling up to the office with pink hair, so let's just make sure this is something like a nice business casual brown. Now we can preview that, take a look at what's going on. I think that is looking pretty good. So for the very top of the hair here, because right now he looks like a friar or a monk, we're just going to go ahead and select our hair and duplicate that with Shift D, tab into edit mode, hit A to select all of this, and just delete it. Now if we go down to our hair cap, we have another curves here, but it's empty, but it also has all of our modifier stack already here. So everything will be easy to adjust. So we're going to rename this to hair underscore top, and we'll rename this one to hair underscore sides. So let's select hair underscore top, and now we're just going to go through the exact same type of thing. We're just going to add some guide curves, and we're going to groom them a little bit. We might have to manually adjust some of the length of the hair because from our reference over here it's going to be a little bit shorter than it is over here. But let's go ahead and just start grooming these piece by piece and figure out exactly what we need to do. So I'm going to start with the back here to the top right side, and I can actually solo some of these. So again, I can tab into edit mode and make sure I'm in set selection rather than point selection, and I can just select these hairs right here, these hair curve guides. And then I can enter into sculpt mode, and it will only highlight those particular hairs. And so then if I go into comb mode, I can't affect anything over here. So now I'll just start combing these into place here, paying attention to the general flow of the hair and as well as the length. And I have all my modifiers turned off here. If I need to turn those back on, I can toggle those back on to see what's going on. Okay, before I go too much farther, actually grooming the hair pieces here, we need to add another vertex map for the top here. Now I could do duplicate curves, but I'd rather just draw out another map. So let's go ahead and go back into object mode, select our hair cap, go back to our data properties panel, and let's just add another vertex group, and we'll call this hair underscore scalp, and we can go back to our modifiers tab up here with the hair curve selected. Under interpolate hair curves, we'll toggle that back on and just reference hair underscore scalp. So now we have to paint this. So I'll go back into vertex mode, make sure X is toggled on, and quickly paint out exactly where the scalp is going to be. I think that will work for a preliminary scalp guide. So now back to grooming our hair. Now that we have this figured out, I can go ahead and toggle this back out. So now we can get back to sculpting here. Now, as I'm sculpting, you can see it's pushing into the scalp, which is not ideal. So what I can do is go up here to the top right, and I can just toggle on this little use sculpt collision. Now, if I try to sculpt down, it will stop on the very top of the scalp. So that's really helpful to keep it from clipping through. As I'm pushing this out, it's not gonna stretch all the way. So I can go to pull tips. I'll just increase the scale of my brush here, and I can just pull this out to right here. And now I have a lot more hair to go with. And as I'm sculpting, if we tab into edit mode and look at the points, we can see I don't have that many points to use. I should have made my points a little bit more heavy from the jump, but because I didn't, now I'm in trouble. I'm having a hard time sculpting them. I can right click and click subdivide, and that will subdivide them by 1, and I can of course adjust my parameters with this context menu, and now I have more vertices to sculpt on. And there we have a very handsome business casual hairstyle, very popular and well worn amongst finance bros. I think that will look really nice. Grooming can be kind of a slow burn to figure out, but once you get it, it starts to just come naturally. Now listen, before we go deeper into the hair-oriented woods, and trust me, we will be going deeper, I want to tell you about my brand new course with School of Motion. If you've already enrolled or you simply don't care, go ahead and skip ahead, I've chaptered it out for you. But if you're having a good time and you want to learn Blender from the ground up with me as your instructor, check out Blender for 3D artists. Together we'll break down Blender and get you up and running, production ready in no time. It's not just another intro course, it's designed to help you speak Blender and problem solve like an industry pro. Click the link in the description below to check it out. I hope to see you in class. As cool and as simple as this hair system is, it's not really possible to add simulation and make it move dynamically. Characters with long hair or a need for dynamic movement are just kinda out of luck. But thankfully there's this fantastic add-on called BGen Flow. Not only does it give you the ability to simulate your hair curves, but it also gives you some super convenient tools that speeds up the grooming workflow. And the best part, it's only $5. That is highway robbery. There's a really great tutorial by the creator of this add-on breaking down the entire tool, and I'll link it down below if you're interested. I would highly recommend checking it out. Now do note that it's a little bit outdated, but with a dash of critical thinking and intuition, you'll be able to figure it out all the same. Now for the sake of this tutorial, we'll be using BGen to create a few dynamic hero hairs that will protrude from the crown. Now once you've purchased and downloaded BGen and you've installed it, you'll be able to access it pretty easily. You just hit in to open the side panel, and down here you'll find BGen hair. It's right there. So once we open this up, you'll see we actually have all of our hair objects in our scene that are assigned to this particular hair cap. In fact, you'll see our mohawk is currently off right there. But we don't really want to access or play with any of this right now. We just want to add another hair object. So let's click plus right here. We're just going to name this hair underscore hero, and we'll click create new, and modifier name is fine, and we can click OK. So now let's make sure this is selected right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and toggle on the ability to be able to actually select this. It's off by default. And now we have a couple of options here. We can initialize something and generate guides from a texture map, but I just want to jump right in and actually start grooming this. So I'm going to click the groom button here, and it takes us into our sculpt mode. And now we can select our little plus tool here, and I'm just going to add 2 or 3 hero hairs through here. So I'm going to make sure I have enough points. Because this is going to be simulated and it's going to be wobbling around a little bit, I'm going to make sure I have 24. And as far as the length goes, I'm just going to set that at 0.4. I think something like that is good. And now we can just kind of set out our hero hair. So I'm going to have 4 hairs right here up front. And of course now you can use all of the groom tools, and we can just take a minute to kind of groom this into place. Okay, I think something like that is going to be pretty good. And now we can go ahead and actually start modifying this. So by default, we have a material down here. I'm just going to X that and put on the material that we already have, our hair right here, hair.001, which I think hair is just our mohawk hair, so make sure that's not pink. So now we can toggle this shut. And let's drop down to initialize, and let's use children. So this will act a lot like the duplicate rather than the interpolation. And now we can go over to deformers, and we can just adjust some of these things. So under hair strands, we can just kind of preview how thick these are. I don't think the root width needs to be that big. I think something like that maybe. Turn that way down. We can change the children amount. Let's say 50 for now. And we can change the radius as well. So I'm going to make the radius quite a bit bigger, something like 0.03. And with that, let's increase the children to 100. So from here, let's go ahead and just exit the groom right up here, and we'll reselect our little hair curves here. And now we can play with the clump profile if we want. That's a really cool tool here. I think something like that is good. And then of course you have noise and braid and curls and all these different accessories down here if you want to play with those. But for our tutorial and for the sake of expediency, we're not going to be playing with any of those right now. We're going to get straight to what you want to see, which is the simulation. So something great about BGen is you can actually toggle back and forth between low poly. So if I click this little button right here, it goes into low poly mode, and you see it just turns that into a strip, which is great. And we will leave it in low poly mode while we simulate, and then we can turn that back on when we're ready to render. So now let's go ahead and go into simulation. But before we actually simulate it, let's go ahead and select the head itself, which will be right here. And I'm going to put this in a new collection. I'm just going to call this collection head. And under the physics tab over here, it'll be this little ball with the orbit around it. We can click collision. And that will just make sure that this head is a collider. That way the hair won't clip through it. Now the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the sides and the top of the hair so I can just kind of focus on this Charlie Brown hero hair right here. So let's go ahead and click create sim guides. We can make sure the collection is set to head so that it has a collision object. And let's just make sure the resolution is 24 to match our hair guides. So I can click OK. And now if I play this back, it is simulated. In fact, we can grab our hair cap here and move it around, and it is completely simulated. So something really great about this, because this is obviously horribly ugly looking, we can change the way that it interacts with the world. So now let's take this curve editor here and we can change this to Bezier. And as you can see, it will actually hold its tension right there. And it's not moving. By default, it's not moving. But as we move the head around, we see we get a little bit of shake there. In fact, we can pull this down a little bit. And it's just kind of flapping in the wind there. And it will have some dynamic movements. And if we play it back, you can see we have some nice movement there, some nice deformation, and it's pretty dynamic. And so you can play with all of these parameters a little bit to get different results. It works pretty good, especially for characters with long hair or if you want that kind of dynamic look. So I can, of course, turn all this back on. It will slow it down quite a bit. Yeah, see, it'll freeze up there, but if I reset it to 0, it will track with that. But I'll turn both of these back off and put it back into low poly mode. And once again, you can see that it has some really cool dynamics and all these parameters, including the collision settings and bake to cache options. All these parameters are super customizable and you can set it up to work pretty much exactly how you want it. And now we have some simulated hair. Was that so bad? Now it may take a minute to fully grasp and master the BGen tools, or even the geometry node hair systems for that matter. But I've started using it in my workflow pretty regularly, and the skill ceiling is pretty low. When you get it, you just get it. Now obviously you are always better off using the right tool for the right job. But for a motion design centric project where the characters are hugely stylized and you don't have access to a dedicated groom artist, BGen works pretty great. This method is obviously not flawless. It has some quirks and requires a little bit of puzzling. But if you're clever and patient, you can get amazing results just using the techniques that we cover. Now go make a few hair grooms that look just terrible. The more that you can iteratively fail, the closer you'll get to success. And if you do make something awesome, be sure to post it on Instagram and tag me, sweetboy.motion. I want to see it and I want to hang it on my fridge.